Hey everybody, Nate Carter here with today's Cornerstone Connection Daily Devotional. And today our Bible reading plan takes us into Matthew 18, actually the second half of Matthew 18. In the first half, we finished up with what's often known as the Matthew 18 principle, which talks about how to handle a conflict when someone sins against you. And then in verse 21, where we start today, it says that then Peter came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times?" And so, right after Jesus has finished talking about how to handle conflict, you get Peter, who's very pragmatic and wants to say, "Okay, so I've worked it out with someone. Now, how many times should I forgive them? Like, how many times should we do this little ordeal in Matthew 18? Once or twice, or how 7 times? I'll be generous." And Jesus, of course, flips it all on his head and says, "Not 7 times, but 70 times 7." In other words, there's no limit to the amount of times that we are to forgive someone when we've worked something out, when someone has repented. Now, I think this leads to a really important concept here, and it's the concept of hypocrisy, because Jesus goes on to tell this story of a debtor who owes a considerable amount to the king, and begs the king's forgiveness, and the king forgives him and forgives the debt. And then that debtor turns around and immediately holds one of his servants accountable for just a fraction of the amount, and doesn't show the same grace towards him. And we see this hypocritical approach to the idea of being relieved of debt. And no one likes a hypocrite, someone who's do as I say and not as I do. And that's exactly what's going on here. This debtor has just been forgiven an enormous amount, and then won't offer that same grace even to a much smaller amount to someone else. He's a hypocrite. And I think that if we're honest with ourselves, we all see the hypocrisy in our own lives. And if we really think about it, you and I have been forgiven an incredible debt. We've had our sins forgiven, our entire life of committing sins that insult and contradict God's ways. We've had them all forgiven, and yet we have the gall to go and not forgive others when they sin against us, to hold a grudge. Friends, we're supposed to be people of grace. We're supposed to be people who demonstrate a different way of living. Because if we are honest with how with ourselves in our own situation, we recognize that we have been massively forgiven. Why wouldn't we then go and forgive anyone who wrongs us? 7 times? No, 70 times 7. For as much as we have been forgiven, we should forgive much as well. This is a wonderful parable that Jesus shares with his disciples. And it reminds me, as we conclude here, of the challenge that I made to you at the beginning of this year. And I encouraged you to rethink the way God thinks about you, to rethink God's heart for you. And this is what it is. God's heart for you is grace. God's heart for you is forgiveness. God's heart for you is to forgive you 70 times 7 times, and then, honestly, much more than that. Now, if that's God's heart for you, God requires us to have the same heart for others. I encourage you today to take a quiet moment and think about someone in your life who you've held a grudge against, and make it right. Offer forgiveness, even if it's just in the silence of your own heart. Take the moment to forgive that person for the way that they wronged you. That's how your Father views you. That's how he's acted toward you, and that's how we must act toward others. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time on the Cornerstone Connection.